Astrology is ancient. It's the study or the observation of the sky and how different alignments of the planets and the stars, different patterns and cycles in nature are a mirror for what's happening on Earth.
Can your birth chart or where the planets are give you any insight into when is a good time? When are you most fertile?
Yes, it is very specific to each individual.
Can you tell us a little bit about the connection between astrology and women's health and our hormones?
Yeah.
Today's episode is all about astrology. So if you've ever been curious about your birth chart or what's going on in the world and the moon and the sky, this episode is for you. So today we have a really special guest with us, Eden Sky Orion, and she's going to tell us all about astrology. We'll dive into what your birth chart is, how you can use it to work with your life, to make life decisions, to help improve yourself, how your birth chart and your astrology can guide you. We'll also dive into the physical aspect of astrology and how astrology can tell us insights into our physical health. So as I mentioned, we have with us Eden Sky Orion. Eden Sky Orion is a New York City-based astrologer and movement and meditation teacher with over a decade of his experience in holistic well-being. She holds a master's in counseling and psychology from Columbia's University Spirituality Mind Body Institute and integrates astrology with somatics, meditation, and positive psychology, offering a deeply grounded and empowering approach to personal growth. Through one-on-one sessions, group workshops, and online courses, Eden helps clients gracefully navigate life transitions, reconnect with their authentic selves, and cultivate clarity, confidence, and inner calm. Her work is for those seeking meaningful growth, alignment, and a deeper connection to their unique path. So let's dive in, because who can't use some more inner calm? So welcome, Eden. I'm so excited to speak to you today. I love astrology. I've always been a fan of it, but it's always been one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to learn it all. Let's leave it to the professionals. So I'm excited to talk to an actual professional.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you as well.
Wonderful. So to start off, how did you get into astrology? How were you called to this work?
Yeah, so I was always kind of aware of astrology because I grew up in Los Angeles with very tapped in spiritual parents. And so it wasn't something I had to go very far to be aware of or have in my life. But I really got into it for myself when I was a teenager, and I was going through a massively difficult time with actually hormone struggles and some injuries. I was a ballet dancer, and I had graduated high school and moved to New York City to pursue dancing, and immediately got injured. I dislocated my knee and just had this domino effect of issues with my health. And so I started meditating and having to pay attention to the cycles of my, the hormonal cycle. And that's also when I kind of found my own connection to spirituality, and astrology was a huge part of that. I was reading my horoscope all the time, and I was every new and full moon trying to learn about what it meant, and I would create my own rituals and then so that was my practice for a while. It was just very personal, and it was kind of about me feeling even through struggles or when I kind of overcame those injuries and the health stuff, the rituals and the practices that I cultivated during that time stayed. It was my way of connecting to myself. And then fast forward to the pandemic, everyone was doing online courses, and it was just, we were just doing things online. So I kind of almost randomly signed up for this course that I didn't even realize it was teaching you how to read your birth chart. It was just astrology thing. And I was like, oh, fun. And when I actually learned, how a chart works and how to read the stars, it was like learning a language that I already spoke. It was so intuitive and natural to me. And I just started reading everyone's chart that I knew. I was obsessed with going deeper and learning more. And I actually really didn't want to turn it into a career. I was very resistant to that idea, but it just kind of called me forward. And every time I said yes to more, life met me with really beautiful opportunities and this feeling that I was making an impact. And so just kind of have kept following that. And it's become a really beautiful professional path that, I've merged with my other modalities. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Is Orion your family given name?
Yes.
So I feel like it was meant to be for
It
you.
is a little, it's kind of
Literally written in the stars.
it is funny. Yeah, it's ironic.
Yeah. So what exactly is astrology?
So astrology is kind of many things. It almost like has many different masks that it has put on through time and through different places on the earth. But astrology is ancient. It's the study or the observation of the sky and how different alignments of the planets and the stars, different patterns and cycles in nature are a mirror for what's happening on Earth. And literally every culture across the world through time, as deep time as you can imagine, has had some kind of relationship to the sky with their mythology, with their rituals, with their understanding of, why we're here on Earth. And so astrology, I think really it's about this relationship to something greater than ourselves. But through time, it's been used different ways. So there was when kind of Christianity was becoming the dominant, religion of the Western world. Astrology was actually part of science at that time because astrology and astronomy weren't separate as they are now. But then there was this kind of rift between, religion and sciences and forms of knowing that weren't mitigated by the church. So astrology got kind of pushed into the shadows and to the back rooms, and it became this kind of occult practice. And then in the 20th century, it kind of had this comeback through the lens of psychology and personality. And so the astrology that we know today is so much about personality, people's personality types. And so astrology has this, there's actually this Jungian concept that's like the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths. And the spirit of the times is what's fashionable, what is the dominant beliefs, what are people accepting at the time. And then the spirit of the depths is this timeless, these timeless truths that follow us no matter what. And to me, astrology kind of spans both, where there's something true and real and important about it enough that it's existed for thousands of years in every single culture and had all of these different, it always is part of the culture somehow. But it's also right now the spirit of the times where it's very popular and people love to talk about their signs and have these kind of be able to place others in certain types in order to understand or relate to them. So the way that we see astrology now with horoscopes and the apps and everything, that's like the spirit of the times version. And I think it will keep evolving. Astrology will show up in different ways based on where humans are at. So I hope that answers the question. I know it's kind of a winding.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. No, I love that answer. So I feel like when people think about personalities and astrology, they're thinking about like my sign, right? I was born in April. My sign is in Aries. But I feel like astrology goes so much deeper. So when you're looking at someone's birth chart, like what are all the aspects? And you don't need to go into detail on all the aspects, but tell us a little bit about how you discover more about a person by looking at their whole birth chart and not just what their quote unquote sign is.
Yeah. So a birth chart, it's like a snapshot of the sky at the moment you were born in the place that you were born. And it contains the entire sky. So when you're just looking up your sign, or some of the apps just give you this list of like where your planets are. But when you're actually looking at the chart, it's this 360-degree wheel that contains the entire sky. So the wheel is, and when we think of the sky, we think of, the sky is above me, right? But in astrology and in reality, the sky is also what's the sky that's on the other side of the earth. So there's this very like holistic picture that you get when you look at when you look at an actual chart. And basically every single person contains the entire sky. Every single person is the whole sky, not just their sun, not just the stars of Aries, but even places where you don't have planets. So in your chart, someone may not have any Aries planets. I don't have any Aries planets, but that is still in my inner sky. That is still a part of me. And so everything in the sky, every star, every planet is in your chart. And so, of course, like where your sun is, that's like a very strong flavor. Like I think of the planets as like the ingredients in a cake. So the cake of Catherine would be like an Aries flavored cake. And then if you have a lot of Aries, it's like a very Aries flavor. But it's still, you know, in a cake, you don't taste the flour necessarily. You might not taste the pinch of salt that goes into the recipe, but it's still there, you know? So when you're thinking about your chart in that more like holistic way, there's so many layers of complexity that go into it. And just like, I like people to know that at the start. But then of course, like the dominant flavors of that cake of you are things to explore and pay attention to and give us a lot of insight. So in the chart, you have all of the planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto. And then there's like the relationships of those planets to each other. So they kind of make these, astrology is very geometrical. They make these angles to each other, these aspects of how the planets are all talking to each other in the sky at that moment. And then you add the flavors of the signs. And then there's even more things like people add asteroids or they add fixed stars or like it could get very, very complicated. So yeah, that's kind of what to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah, I like that picture that our birth chart is a capture of the entire sky at the time we're born and the location we're born, because that makes it so unique. Whereas if you're just looking at one sign, right, like a Virgo, there's 1,000, 100 million Virgos in the planet, but how many people were born at the exact same time at the exact same place as you, right? That's going to be so much less.
Yeah. And the thing is, even you could have the same, I've read charts of twins even that are born at like almost the same time, same exact chart. Right. But they're still two unique individuals. And like, to me, astrology is way less deterministic than language makes it feel. Like when we talk about a chart or talk about something happening in the astrology, it feels very finite. But in reality, we are alive and we are living the astrology. And so even two people with the same chart could have very different life experiences and be, they might have some of that same flavor, that same like inner essence, or they might have some of the same gifts or strengths. They might have some of the same challenges and things to overcome. But our lives are also dependent on our choices and also the circumstances that we can't control and how we meet them. And so, yeah, the chart, it's not a sentence. It's not a final thing. It's like, and then as you grow and you live, your relationship to different parts of your chart also change. So like when I was younger, I'm a Cancer sun, and the Cancer part of my chart, I have so much Cancer, and it was like super sensitive, and like that was just such a challenge, and something I almost like resented about myself, being so sensitive. And then, as I've grown up and figured out how to use that sensitivity, like that is one of the things that gives me this gift of astrology. So it's like as we grow, as we evolve, as we have different experiences, we have different relationships to our chart or to ourselves, and we find different strengths in different places, or we find new challenges in different places. And I think that's important too.
Yeah, that is very important. So how can astrology be used to help support people in their lives? When people are coming to you, is it normally just to understand where they are, or is it for, a specific challenge?
Yeah, I feel like I kind of get two different types of people coming to me, and it's like pre-Saturn return and post-Saturn return. So yeah, Saturn return. So the first Saturn return happens when you're about like 29, 30.
Okay.
And that's like a big,
that checks out.
Yeah, Saturn is all about taking things seriously and showing up to our responsibilities. And Saturn is related to the bones. So it's like, what is the bones of your life? And you really have to deal with things and kind of set yourself up for when you're at that, crux of time, turning 30, there is this certain pressure to structure your life in a certain way. A lot of people feel that. So when people come to me before the Saturn return, they're usually more interested in that question of like, why am I like this? Like, who am I? They're figuring themselves out. They want to know, their purpose. What is my place here? Where are my people? Um, and there's a bit more of this like seeking energy of like trying to, find themselves in their love.
Right.
And so that's something that I hold space for and that the chart really can help with because it is so, it has so much information about our essence and our gifts and the things that our soul is here to experience. And then when people come to me post Saturn return, the questions are more about how do I know who I am, but how do I align my life with that? So it's people that are in kind of like career transitions and, are trying to figure out what is the best path for them. What is the path that will give them the most satisfaction or the most sense of, a feeling of joy in their life. People that are, have questions about relationships. It's not so much who am I, but it's more of how do I take who I am and then make my life the most beautiful thing possible for me to experience.
Yeah.
So there's more of that like guiding through transitions and
right.
There are questions also become more about timing of things because astrology, I primarily practice psychological astrology, which is this perspective I'm giving you of like the inner essence and all of that. But astrology is also very useful for timing, so people are going through a difficult phase, they're having something challenging and you can see in the chart, okay, this is what's showing up and here's the timeline of it. Because something beautiful that astrology reminds us is that everything ends. Everything. We were in these phases. There's always another phase, even though sometimes some phases feel really long. Some planets have really long cycles or they move really slowly. And it's like we're in a phase where we're just having to be in something super uncomfortable, or there's phases that are really overwhelming or there's upheaval phases, But astrology can tell you how long those phases last and how to direct your energy through a challenging time or how to direct your energy in a time that feels really good, like a time of growth, a time of a new beginning feeling, or a time where you really feel like you're rising and up leveling. Like astrology can also give us information about how to lean into that and make the most of it. So those are the kind of things that I use it for.
I think it can be really nice, even just the validating aspect of astrology when you're going through a tough time to be like, this isn't just me. It's not in my head. Like this is really happening. Yeah. And then to also have a timeline of when it's going to end. I feel like that's everything.
Yeah. I really, when I actually learned more about astrology and I was so just ravenous for this information. So I was going back through all these different times in my life and I saw, what was happening in my astrology when I was going through this difficult dark night of the soul, hormone problems, injuries time. And I was like, oh, if I had known that then, it would have been so helpful. But, it's part of the journey to just be in it too. Because the thing is, astrology, it has all this information, but it doesn't do any work for us. It can direct us. It can give us that affirmation, the confirmation, which is so valuable and nourishing. It's a specific kind of nourishment to be like, yes, what you're going through is real and there is an end date to it, but it doesn't, sometimes time does the work for us, but astrology doesn't. So like when you have all that information, there are things you have to kind of do with it. And sometimes what you have to do is like be patient, sometimes you just need to like calm down and like be, and that is a directive that astrology gives us sometimes, but
yeah. So if people are coming to you in that first half before the return to Saturn, I think you said it was, or just any time in their life when they are unclear on where they're supposed to go or big life decisions, or like maybe they're uncomfortable or unhappy in their job, but they don't know what they want to do. Can astrology really support in making those big decisions?
Mm-hmm. Definitely it can support. I think as an astrologer, I'm very like, people need to make their own decisions. I never tell someone advice like, oh, do this or do that. Some astrologers would, but I don't feel comfortable with that. And that the astrology, sometimes it gives very clear, like, if you choose this path, this is what you're facing. If you choose this path, this is what you're facing. And often that comes in like, okay, I'm doing something new that I'm afraid of. So yes, those fears are there. You're going to have to face them. Or the other challenge is, keep doing things the same way. And there's the challenge of that, right? And so astrology, it is really this guide, and it can inform our decisions in a really deep and meaningful way. It can inform our decisions on this level of like purpose and soulfulness that's just it's so deep. But yeah, it doesn't make the decisions for us. We always have choice. And, there are certain moments in life where things are way out of our control and we don't have choice, and we just have to go with what's in front of us. And astrology does speak to that as well. It can tell us sometimes when those moments might be or what the themes of them will be, but at the end of the day, there's always little micro choices that we make about how we are showing up, how we're responding to life, how we're, going forward. And I think our choices are equally as important as what the astrology potential is, because we're in the driver's seat a lot more than we think.
Yes. So you mentioned that you looked back at your astrology to look at times when you were going through hormonal problems. Can you tell us a little bit about the connection between astrology and women's health and our hormones?
Yeah. Well, there's this whole field called medical astrology, which I'm not an expert in. I just know very like,
I didn't even know that was a thing. So
yeah, it's really interesting, and it's also ancient. There's certain all plants have different relationships to different planets, and this goes back to alchemy practices and indigenous practices where the plants and plant medicines and physical ailments, they have relationships to the planets as well. And so the planets can be used in like remedial ways, like as remedies. But this is not something that I am an expert in. There's a lot more to it. But basically, you have transits. So you have your birth chart. And then basically to know what's coming up for you, you look at transit. So that's how the current sky, where the planets are, what geometry they're making with your birth chart, and what conversation the current sky is having with your essence and that snapshot of the moment you were born. And so there are transits that are known to be difficult on the body. There's ones that are known to be difficult on the mind. Obviously, we know how connected the mind and body are. And, a transit, nothing in astrology has one meaning. So yeah, if I see a transit that looks difficult potentially for health, I'll definitely tell someone like, oh, this is a good time to check up on this. Or if someone has, they already know that they have certain issues, I'm like, okay, those issues could be stimulated at this time. So it's like a check-in. I have also had people come to me there that are like, oh, I'm dealing with this long-term, injury recovery or recovering from something. And I'm like, okay, how can we use the information of your chart to support that process? And like, here's times to be a little more careful or cautious. And, so there's lots of information there. But when it comes to women's health and hormones, a lot of the time will have to do with the moon, their moon placement, and any transits that are happening to their moon. The moon is symbolically, it's about our inner world and our emotions and their relationship to nourishment. And so for that reason, the moon is also symbolic of the mother archetype and just the feminine body in general.
That's very similar to Chinese medicine, right? We consider yin nighttime, the time of the moon. That's our sex hormones, our estrogen, our feminine energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I'm sure in Chinese medicine, there's also, because there's, Chinese astrology, I'm sure there's lots of insights that come from that, and a really deep history that has so much more wisdom than the Western astrology that I practice. But yeah.
So when women, I also don't know a lot about Chinese astrology, but that is like a whole thing. But I would be surprised if it was different than Western. I feel like they probably have a lot of similarities to them.
So there's a lot of arguments in the astrology world about the different lineages and branches of astrology and their different ways of doing things. Like, they are at the root very closely tied. But there, astrology has been shaped by the cultures that it's been a part of. And so there's like a lot of depth and nuance in Eastern astrology, and especially Vedic astrology, which comes from India. That is an unbroken lineage. So unlike in the West, where astrology had to be hidden for all these years and books were burned and all of that, in India, it's an unbroken lineage. So it was never suppressed. It never stopped being practiced. And so a lot of the knowledge is much more like no one had to go dig it out again, so there's, in Vedic astrology, there's the medical components too. And I think people use it more in their lives actually than in the West. So yeah, there's lots of like different culturally specific wisdom that are in these different branches of astrology.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. If a woman is bleeding on her full moon, meaning she has her period on the full moon, what does that mean? I feel like that gives you some superpower, but why don't you clear that up for me?
Yeah, I love this question. To me, this isn't something that is like has a meaning in astrology. Like there's different spiritual, I don't know, things that are said about bleeding on the new moon or bleeding on the full moon and like what it means. To me, it doesn't have a specific meaning, but the menstrual cycle, it is connected to the moon. It's like that's the original cycle, and our bodies are so connected to the moon. If you think about the moon controls the waters of the earth, and our bodies are mostly water. And there's also all this research, like real hard science research about the moon, activating bacteria, and the moon also, and like our bodies are also we contain a lot of bacteria. And the moon cycle and mental health, and the moon cycle and sleep, and all these things. Like our bodies are nature. Like we forget that, but we're tied to the moon and to the other planets as well. But the moon is the closest to Earth, so it's the one that we have like the strongest connection with. And the moon cycle and the menstrual cycle, they have always been one. And it's just in these more recent times with our toxic world with so many hormone disruptors and, ways that we can superficially like alter our cycle, or the toxic things that alter our cycle, where we feel more disconnected from that. So bleeding with the full moon, like it does feel super powerful. And I think to me, it's just like this reminder of my body is nature, and that there's this internal clock, this internal sense of time. Like astrology is also really about time, and the body has its own relationship to time, and it kind of reminds me of that. I'm sure there's some people that can make very specific meanings out of it, but it's not how I see it really.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. I think it's funny. I had a patient actually like 2 days ago ask me why the menstrual cycle is supposed to be 28 days. And I kind of paused for a minute, like thinking I had to have some Western answer. I was like, it's the moon, right? Like there is no other reason that out there. I almost felt like weird saying that, but it is the truth. We are connected to Earth. We're a species of nature. And that's just what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Well said.
So I feel like there's probably a lot of myths in astrology out there. Or are there any like major ones you want to debug today?
Well, one of them is definitely, which I already spoke to, of like you are the entire sky and your chart has everything in it. That is a big one that I really want people to understand, because also people, especially the way astrology is talked about now, people have these certain judgments like, Geminis and Scorpios tend to get the most judgment. But it's like, you have Gemini in your chart. Every single person does. Every single person has Scorpio in their chart. You have every single sign. You have the entire sky. And often the signs that we don't get along with, or the qualities that we judge the most, those are in our shadow. They're these parts of us that we don't accept, or the shadow is what we judge as well. That sometimes some of our gifts, some of our strengths are hidden there, or there's this like gold that's hidden behind judgments and fears. It's the shadow that when we accept and find a way to connect with those qualities, not only does it make life more rich and more full and more real, it also just gives us this deeper connection with people. And I think we all are craving to be seen and understood and to connect. And one of the things that I didn't expect, astrology to give me, but it has, is this greater level of understanding of people that are different from me and how I can, see qualities that I may judge or see qualities that I feel like, oh, I could never be like that, and in a way that like, I wish I could be like that, and be like, okay, well, here's where that quality actually lives in me. And here's where, I can connect with that in myself. And like an example to kind of make this more clear is in my chart, there's very little fire. There's almost no fire in my chart. And that was always such a struggle too, where I didn't feel like I could be loud or be direct or, stand up for myself in certain situations. I was just so soft, so watery, like, which I am. But when I learned my chart, I learned that fire is in all the places where work is in my chart and career. And
those are important places to have fire.
Yeah. And truly by following this career that I am so passionate about, it has like even when I'm talking to you about astrology, like I feel hot, like physically, like anytime I'm doing this work, like it helps me connect to my fire. And having the space for fire in my life, but seeing, okay, I'm not going to be fiery in maybe the way that I talk or in my relationships or something like that. But in my work is where I have my inner fire. And it's brought so much balance and so much joy to my life to connect with fire. And I've been able to, expand the fire in other ways of my life, like being able to stand up for myself more or connect with anger, connect like the kind of protective anger and things like that. And so, just knowing like you have everything, every single one of us has everything, and certain things we can, certain elements, certain signs, certain things it's easier for us to connect with, others take more work, but there is a place for everything in your within you.
I didn't realize that we had different signs and different aspects of our life, like career, relationship, and stuff like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So in the chart, there's the 12 houses. And this is just like a symbolic way that, there's the 360-degree sky, and then it's divided by 12. And it's just a symbolic way of dividing the chart to be able to speak about different areas of life. So there's the 6th house, which is about your day-to-day, your work and your habits and how you take care of yourself on the day-to-day. And like pets show up in the 6th house because they're part of our daily routines. Then there's like the 8th house, which is about intimacy and shadow and kind of like where we might have some shame, or also where sexuality is. And then there's like the 2nd house, which is about money and finances and our sense of worth and our self-worth. And so it can get very specific of like how all the different aspects of our life are contained in.
Right. I feel like there's a stigma of during certain moon phases or astrological events, you are or aren't supposed to do things like what you're meant to do during Mercury in retrograde and what you're not meant to do. Like, how serious are those things?
Yeah. I mean, I try to strike a balance where, again, like when you're talking about it, it sounds very final. It's very deterministic, but I really try to stay away from that type of language because it's like people got to live their lives, I'm not into the very prescriptive things because it also just feels so flat. It feels like, do this, don't do that. It's like, but if it isn't, and Mercury retrograde is another one. There's so many, I like to bust the myths about because it's not a time to be afraid of or a time to be like blaming everything on, like Mercury retrograde actually bring a lot of opportunities and new perspectives. And Mercury retrogrades we encounter challenges, we encounter frustrating things. It's like, but it's also part of the wholeness and the complete picture of life to have moments where we feel like we're going backwards or where we feel like we're hitting a wall. It's like, it's all welcome in my opinion. And if it is Mercury retrograde, like I will, I have certain like rituals or ways that I honor Mercury, and I will leave early for the airport and I will try to not overschedule myself, or like when the things happen that you're like, oops, like I'm like, okay, this is that retrograde moment. It becomes like fun. or even
Right.
difficult transits or like eclipses is another one where eclipses, there's a lot of like, ooh, don't do this, do that. And it's like during an eclipse, I will definitely try to rest and I love to meditate during eclipses. I've had like really powerful meditations during them, but sometimes like you have to do stuff. You have to like, you just have to. So I always, I am also very spiritual with how I practice personally. Like I don't tell other people they need to have a certain type of spirituality, but like prayer and ritual are a big part of my personal practice. And I feel that those things help me move gracefully through even the difficult times.
Right.
But eclipse, like we had that eclipse last spring that you could see here in New York, and like, I wasn't going out and looking at it because it's not an energy I want to.
Oh no,
I'll go out, but right, like it's fun. It's like it's interesting. Yeah. Like that was for me what I felt was right. So yeah, there's lots of like do this, don't do that, but you have to always take it with what feels good to you. And yeah, that's super important for anything with spirituality or even with health. I feel, there's lots of advice that's very, prescriptive, but we always have to take things in and have our own like center of what is a yes for me, what is a no for me, and what am I willing to try? What am I willing to, and just, making your choice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of times people rely too much on other things, right? Advice from a health practitioner, from astrologer to like tell them where to go and what to do. When the truth is like you need to listen to your intuition, to your solar plexus to guide you.
Yeah. And the thing is that it's much easier, it's much quicker to just be like, oh, the doctor told me to do this, I'm going to do it, versus actually learning this relationship with your own body and intuition. Like it's a practice. Like it takes time and it can be very quiet at first if you've never tuned into it before. And so it's a more winding road, but it definitely is the best road because it's something that no one can ever take away from you.
Right.
There might be a doctor can tell you one thing and then there's new research that says the opposite thing. And it's like, but you have to know what works for you. It's
right. And we live in a world now with so much sound, so much advice, and it's all completely different stuff. And it's like, what feels good to you and your body?
Yeah. And you might have to try and be wrong at first in order to figure it out.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Which shows a beauty in being wrong too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So I work a lot with fertility patients. So I have to ask this question. Can your birth chart or where the planets are give you any insight into when is a good time? When are you most fertile? Not meaning when you're ovulating, but is there a time in your life to start a family?
Yes, it is very specific to each individual. So it's not like, oh, this age or this time of year. It's like very highly specific to their exact chart. And then of course, you might have a partner's chart or there's like so many factors to consider. I have predicted some pregnancies before, but I don't, again, like I don't like to be too deterministic about it. And sometimes people get very like, oh, I don't want my baby to be a Virgo or whatever. They're like, and it's like their chart's gonna have Virgo in it anyway. Like you could be like really planned so they're not a certain sign, but then their moon is that sign. It's like, and I really believe that babies, human babies or creative babies or anything that we're starting in our life always comes at the perfect divine time where each chart, it's like births are very important in astrology. You always look at the birth chart. You can look at death charts as well, or you can look at other charts, but the birth charts contain everything.
Wonderful. So I'll put all your information in the show notes if anyone wants to find you, to reach out, your website. And I think you mentioned Instagram is the best way to find you. Thank you so much for being on here today. I feel like I learned so much about astrology. And yeah, this was really insightful. So thank you, Eden.